Speaking in theory, is it really possible to escape the alligator Alcatraz in the middle of the Florida Everglades? And if you manage to escape, I'm sure there would be a massive police response. You know what, superficially it might seem impossible to escape the Everglades. In fact, if the right situations occurred at the same time, escaping this prison would be very simple. The alligator Alcatraz. If you escape this place, you're going to be instantly eaten by alligators. Oh, and don't forget the pythons. Interesting, because 20 years in South Florida, I never once saw a python in the Everglades. So let's for a minute put away the sensationalism and let's talk about actual facts. Under which circumstances it would be possible to legitimately escape the alligator Alcatraz. The name to me alone is laughable. Everything in the Everglades isn't water. There's a lot of different landscapes out here. There's campgrounds, there's roads, there's trails. There's a lot of places here where it wouldn't be hard to find some fishing line on the side of the road and then fish your life away. Of course, the most obvious thing is the abundance of food that exists in the Everglades. And despite a massive manhunt, you practically wouldn't even have to worry about food out here. If you have as much as a knife or a machete, you will have food. Alligators themselves are a great thing to eat. Tastes amazing. We eat it all the time. Let's not even talk about the fish. Despite the fact that there's people on your trail, the amount of food in the Everglades is so abundant that you wouldn't have to worry about that. But there isn't just food in the Everglades. There's ATVs, there's kayaks, canoes, and all types of recreational paraphernalia laying around everywhere. ATVs, trucks. The most obvious thing is vehicles. They're everywhere in the Florida Everglades, and many times people are outside of their vehicles. It wouldn't be hard to steal a vehicle in theory. Now, the goal of today's video is definitely not to encourage anybody to escape. I just want to remind you guys the reality versus the fake. Obviously the biggest danger in the Everglades isn't freaking alligators. It's stuff like Africanized bees, cottonmouth snakes, not pythons. And let's not forget the mosquitoes. You would definitely have to be prepared to deal with mosquitoes, Africanized bees, and other insects, because that is the real threat in the Everglades. So let's just forget about all of the things you heard on Fox News, from alligators to pythons. The most realistic thing you're going to do is carjack a lost tourist from Germany. Or maybe steal a boat, or maybe steal an ATV, and please believe there's places to hide in the Florida Everglades. Heading east into Miami would be pointless because this area is the river of grass. Now, during the right time of year, if the water levels got low enough, let's not forget that ATVs can easily float. In theory, if you had access to an ATV with gas, you could literally make that trek within one night. During hurricanes, the storm surge can come in as much as 40 miles, practically reaching this prison location. Now, anybody who had a boat could literally just ride the storm surge back to the swamp and into the 10,000 islands, an easy escape. If you follow the yellow line, it is only 22 miles to open ocean. Once you're in open ocean, you're pretty much good to go. Another very obvious route would be to go north into the Big Cypress Swamp, panther habitat, black bear habitat. This area will likely be less swampy. If you make your escape during the wintertime, during the heart of the dry season, and escape into the Big Cypress would mean easy access to higher ground, aka bear country, where there's even cows out there for food because there's ranching. There are predators like Florida panthers and bobcats and other dangers out there like rattlesnakes, but for the most part during the dry season, you should be easily able to cross canals. Most of the land will be dry, and at that point, you will eventually reach trails and other areas where you could easily escape. In theory, all you would need is a compass to know which direction you're heading, a knife, and proper clothing to keep the mosquitoes away, and you should have a pretty good escape. During the winter months, the weather will be perfect. It'll be dry, and most of the areas that are swampy are going to be dry. During a hurricane, the storm surge would come up, inundating roads, and of course, helicopters wouldn't be able to fly. In the case of a storm surge, the water would just about reach the prison, at which point, if you had access to a boat or a canoe, you could literally ride the storm surge back through canals. Once you're on a canal with an outgoing tide of a storm surge, it would be fairly simple to find yourselves in the 10,000 islands, completely out of reach. So in the case of a hurricane, the perfect conditions could come into play where it would delay or prevent the response from cities like Naples and Miami to come hunt you down, as well as provide a water highway for you to escape. Finding a canoe in the Everglades wouldn't be hard. Most of the parks out there have it. If there were a storm surge where everything flooded, you could easily hop on a canoe and ride that storm surge straight down into the 10,000 islands, at which point you will be miles and miles away from where they think you would be before they could respond. You do realize that most people who are illegally in the United States right now had to cross through the Darien jungle between Colombia and Panama, one of the most treacherous places in all of the Americas. Not only does it rain as much as Florida, does it have swamps and rivers that are more dangerous in Florida, they also have mountains, nonstop rainfall, more warm weather and diseases. You do realize that these people that are going to be housed here may have had to cross as many as 12 countries before they arrived to the United States. They also had to cross a border in a desert between Peru, and then they also may have crossed through a desert in the United States and Mexico border. The point being is that these are individuals who have crossed 12 countries on foot. For them to go 22 to 40 miles through the Everglades is laughable. The notion that people think that these people that are going to be housed here are going to be afraid of the Florida Everglades. Okay, you have to go 40 miles through the swamp. Oh, that's scary. You just cross 12 countries, thousands of miles, countries like Mexico, Colombia, where there are cartels that take you in. Are you kidding me? Like, do you really think that people that just crossed 12 countries are going to be afraid of going 20 or 40 miles through the Everglades? Deserts, mountains, jungles, rivers. A lot of them didn't make it. You do realize that these people crossed 12 countries, 12 borders illegally, in mangroves, which is what's in the Everglades. You may not be aware of the journeys that people took to get to this country, but let me tell you, 40 miles through the Everglades is a lot easier than crossing the Darien, than crossing the desert in Peru, than going through the jungles of Guyana and Brazil and Venezuela. If you think that going 40 miles through the Everglades is scary, try going thousands of miles across 12 countries. You know, if you go out there, there's alligators and pythons. Ooh, that's scary. Not to somebody who just crossed 12 countries through deserts, swamps, jungles, and cartels. So the psychological barrier doesn't exist. If somebody is given the opportunity and at least a knife or machete, the chances that they can escape if they're able to dodge law enforcement are actually pretty good. And not everything is water in the Everglades. Your most dangerous adventure in the Everglades is going to be dealing with the mosquitoes. This is what could definitely put an end to your escape ideas. However, if your plan is according to the weather, if you make that escape during the winter, not only will you have to not worry about waters, you would also not have to worry about mosquitoes to the same degree as during the summer. Of course, the lack of roads and infrastructure in the Florida Everglades, it's a very desolate area, would suggest that the most obvious thing to do would just be to carjack somebody and get into a vehicle. Within 45 minutes, you could be in Naples or Miami. In other words, in that case, they're on Interstate 75, US 41 in Miami or Naples, and they can very quickly escape this place by using the road routes. Okay, now they know that you escaped, they're making roadblocks or checking vehicles. Then you would have to venture into the Everglades. At that point, what time of the year the escape happens in would be a huge player in whether you would have any chance of surviving or not. During the wet season, if you had access to a boat, it could actually be very advantageous as well. After all, it is called the River of Grass. If you had a canoe and started to flow southward with the water, eventually that water would lead you straight into the Gulf of Mexico, at which point you would end up on a beach with plenty of fish and resources. Along the way, you would find plenty of food. On top of that, these are all popular fishing destinations, so if you had a knife, you could easily cut up some fishing line and find fishing lures, which means while it wouldn't be the most convenient fishing, you would be able to find fishing resources. With very limited resources, it would actually be very likely for you to make the trek across the Everglades. Most likely, though, you're going to find somebody outside of their vehicle and try to carjack them, and that will be your ticket out of the Everglades. If you can do that fast enough, you're free to go. Within a few hours, you'll be free. But if they found out that you escaped the prison, they'll have roadblocks, which means your only chance of escaping then would be to venture into the mangroves and swamps. As someone very familiar with the Everglades, I can assure you that under the right circumstances that are mostly going to revolve around weather, what time of the year this would happen, your possibilities of escaping could be pretty high, and you would have a lot of things working in your advantage. Now, there are some disadvantages to contend with. A lot of people actually get lost hiking in the Florida Everglades, which means that there's already a system in place to find people very quickly. That means that your chances of actually being found are extraordinarily high, but you would have the advantage of being able to hear the helicopters coming and perhaps trying to hide or conceal yourself before they approached you. You could perhaps dodge the helicopters, which would be the only way they could find you. Because of the abundance of water, dogs would eventually lose their trail. In fact, looking at the actual prison itself, it would be hard for them to know exactly in which direction you left, because the prison is actually surrounded by rivers and creeks in all directions. This gives you the advantage of being able to go far without being detected, without them knowing and being hot on your trail. In fact, you would even find abandoned camps out there. There's a lot of campgrounds. There's a lot of people who live hidden in the Everglades, and a lot of times they leave behind camps where you can find stuff to use like tents and other resources which could aid your escape. Ideally, to facilitate your escape, you would run into one of these camps, which would most likely have a boat, paddles, and other resources. The moment you reach the Pinelands in Collier County, you at that point would increase your chances of escaping dramatically, because from here forward, trails are accessible, and anyone tracking you from a helicopter would have to deal with 980 black bears and thousands of deer, which would all give false heat sensing readings, which means despite the fact that they're experts at tracking people here, there would eventually be so many false readings that it would complicate finding you infinitely as you approach escape routes closer to Naples. But this would have to be a planned escape with somebody who has knowledge of the landscape, because if you don't have a plan out here, you're not going to make it just randomly running in one direction in the Everglades. You would definitely have to have a game plan, understanding of the landscape and surroundings to know what your game plan is going to be, because there's too many variables in the Everglades. They don't have running water. They drink rainwater. They have a really good immunity because in Latin America, they don't get water from the tap. They don't drink water from a bottle. They actually drink rainwater, and they have a really strong stomach and immunity. Keep in mind that many people are coming from countries like Venezuela, Brazil, Colombia, where there are real jungles, and these people live in these jungles in their home country, catching alligators and snakes and fishing. So maybe to you the Everglades may seem like an alien environment, but for somebody from Colombia who lived in the jungle in the freaking Amazon, the Everglades is kind of an environment that they can thrive and survive in, because back in their home countries, they weren't going to the office, they were going to the jungle to get their food. So if you know anything about Latin America, you know that many people are indigenous and they live in the jungle. They fish for a living or they hunt for a living. So the notion of them going into the swamps to get their food every day, that's what they were doing back home most of their lifetime. In much of Latin America, Nicaragua, Cuba, Venezuela, Colombia, a lot of the people in these places are indigenous and they survive by hunting and gathering every single day. Their lifestyle may not be going to the grocery store for food. Their lifestyle is actually catching their food. So to them, this environment wouldn't be that challenging, and they would probably have some pretty good knowledge on how to catch little crabs, how to cook snakes, how to catch fish, stuff that me and you probably don't know how to do. They probably know how to do it, and they've done it their whole lifetime. So I do believe that the individuals that are here will actually be very well adapted to the environment outside of those fences. But in the case of, let's say, a hurricane, all of those systems could fail, and perhaps if all those sensors are underneath water or moving floodwaters, none of that would work. Helicopters couldn't fly. It's definitely even possible that a storm surge could reach this prison and flood the whole entire thing. Combine that with wind damage, perhaps you could have a massive escape of hundreds of inmates during the middle of a hurricane. And keep in mind that you're 40 miles from Miami. Now, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Miami, but there are some crafty criminals in Miami. Obviously, it will probably take a while for people to figure out this prison, figure out the ins and outs, but eventually somebody will figure a way out. While sleeping in the Everglades at night, our biggest fear at night was black bears and Florida panthers. Those are two very realistic things that could come upon you that nobody's talking about. It's like, what's hilarious about this situation is that the real animals that are dangerous out there, the black bear and the Florida panther, nobody talks about that. People are saying pythons and alligators, but this is the reality of somebody who knows the Florida Everglades, myself, versus the stupidity that people hear on TV and what they believe. But now imagine that you're camping in the Florida Everglades. Is the notion that somebody could escape a prison 15, 20 miles away from your campground with the intention of carjacking you. That kind of changes the whole dynamic of camping in the Florida Everglades. And you're not, there's no phone signal. How are you going to report it? Whatever. Somebody were to get victimized by an escaped inmate out here, they would have practically very little. They would have to wait probably hours before they can find another human. So definitely scary. Definitely scary for people who camp in the Everglades. But anyways, that's what I think would happen out there. I definitely think it's possible to escape. And I actually think that because of the particularities of people camping out there and how people just assume that they're out in the Everglades, that they'll leave their keys in the car or whatever, the crab, the last thing they expect somebody lurking in the bushes. So I think if somebody was an escaped inmate and there wasn't and besides, if you're out in the Everglades and there's an escaped inmate in the area, you don't have phone signals to get a notification or whatever, so you're not going to know there's an escaped inmate. So there's going to be people out there hunting and fishing and camping, and they're going to make some pretty good sitting targets for somebody to a crime of opportunity, a carjacking. And this video is all hypothetical. This is a what-if scenario. All this video is somebody's opinion on escaping a prison and being able to manage the landscape around it. So this is all in theory. You may have heard of a good pair of Crocs or a good pair of Gator boots. Not sure if you know this, but that's kind of something people actually make in Latin America. It's kind of like what they do over there. So I'm not sure what makes people think that Latinos are scared of alligators. We eat them. We make green leather boots out of them. And then the fear of pythons. Are you aware that people in Latin America wear python leggings and python boots and stuff like that? In fact, I think at my wedding, there's somebody that came to our wedding party wearing python leather leggings. You realize that for somebody in Latin America, pythons are dear to Americans. They're just everywhere. Pythons are literally everywhere in Latin America. That's where they're from. Somebody from Latin America running into a python is like somebody from Ohio running into a deer. I mean, the irony of this situation is if you've been to Latin America, you may be aware that people make alligator and python artifacts for tourists. Mosquitoes, panthers, black bears are a more realistic threat. Then, of course, there's access to water, but most people in Latin America who are coming from the countryside, for example, they don't have tap water. They drink water from the rain. When I visit my family in Latin America, they don't have filtered water. They drink rainwater. They have guppies in the water where they drink. Most people that cross the jungle or that cross the desert will drink water from puddles and stuff. So it wouldn't be their first time drinking water that would probably make you and me very sick. Like, Americans just assume that everybody else in the whole world is just as soft as they are, drinking tap water and air conditioning and afraid of what's outside. Like, no, dude, people are from the jungles. Like, people live in the jungles. Like, we're not allowed to live in the Everglades here in Florida, but like, you think people in Cuba don't live in the swamps? You think people in Colombia don't live in the swamps? You think people in the mountains of Nicaragua's don't freaking catch pythons and eat them and make leather boots out of them? Like, get real. Like, these people are from freaking Latin America, bro. They're not afraid of the Everglades. And these are not like concrete bunkers. These are like trailers surrounded by fences. It's not hard to break out of there. You guys remember that the Florida government has spent $6 billion in the Florida Restoration Project? I don't know. I don't even know why I would mention that in this video. It doesn't seem to fit anything. I don't know why I would mention. Why would I even mention something like that? Anyways, it has nothing to do with this, so I don't even know why would I mention that when it has nothing to do with this.